because you started by saying that initially violence was a lot higher in the human race and had to be chipped away by law and state. Do you see it as a stronger aspect of human nature, and that what we have now is quite fragile, and anything like pressures like food shortages or anything like that would bring it tumbling down? Or do you see it as a stronger trend going upwards?
Yeah, I tend to see it as a reasonably robust trend, not because human nature has changed. I think we still have the capacity, if whenever states retreat or fail or collapse, leaving a zone of anarchy, then violence can shoot right back up, and we've seen a number of instances of that in recent history. So it does depend on the strength of our institutions, which have shown themselves to be reasonably robust in large parts of the world. The question of whether, I often get asked whether the impending stresses on resources and climate might lead to a return to war and organized conflict. And the answer is not necessarily. I don't think anyone could predict that it's not going to happen. Nor do I think that it is inevitable or even highly likely that it will happen. For two reasons. One of them is it's not a given that there are going to be resource shortages. There may be no shortage of fossil fuels for quite some time if you consider the oil shale, the oil, gas, and coal reserves. Even water, which is far more stressed and far more precious to life, there's an awful lot of salt water on Earth, and we know how to desalinate it, and there exist green technologies that can produce power that in principle can desalinate water. So it's not guaranteed that there are going to be resource shortages. Also, there's actually a very tenuous connection between resource shortages and war. Very few wars of the last 100 years and even beyond consisted of two adversaries fighting over some common physical resource. When you think about it, it's hard to name any wars, major wars that were fought over resources. Wars are fought over fear and ideology and revenge and containment and justice, all kinds of intangible factors that have nothing to do with we're thirsty, they're thirsty, there's only so much water, we're going to fight over it. And indeed, that qualitative impression is borne out by some quantitative studies that show a very poor correlation between environmental stress at time 1 and armed conflict at time 2. This is no reason to be complacent about climate change, resources, and so on. They're formidable challenges, and if they're not met, there could be an awful lot of human misery from hunger and disease and so on. But that would be reason enough to be concerned about resources. You don't need there to be organized wars in addition to be concerned. And there may not be.
One more here, and then there's two over there.
Sort of leading on from the previous question. I was really intrigued when you mentioned the EU earlier in your talk, and you said about how almost boring it sounded to suggest that France or Germany might go to war. And I know it does sound quite similar to the question before, but do you think that this apathy and this boringness about even discussing this possibility is in a way going to open up a potential for it to happen?
Kind of lull us into a false sense of security.
Exactly, and then we stopped caring about the things that, when we did care about them, that was what stopped them from happening.
Well, it is worth thinking about, because one could argue that the war weariness of most of Europe in the wake of World War I created the opening for Hitler, because everyone was so desperate not to go back to war that they kept appeasing Hitler, who cynically exploited that war weariness precisely in order to manipulate his adversaries. So it is something of a concern, although I think by now, now that we've gone through 2 world wars, we've kind of learned the lesson of going to war too quickly, as in World War I, but there's also the lesson of what Hitler did. And so the problem with Europe in the 1930s is they had no experience with Hitler. Now we do. So I think there's at least less likely chance that we'll get fooled again. There is an advantage, though, to war being relegated to the realm of the unthinkable, in the sense that it's not even a live option in people's minds, especially in leaders' minds, and that's probably on balance a good thing. That is, you got a crisis, what are your set of options? Increasingly, at least among developed countries and democracies, war is just not even on the list of options. It's almost, it would be like a sick joke. And certainly conquest for material gain, which was not always true, needless to say. And as with other changes in human moral sensibilities, where a practice can go from widespread and unquestioned to attacked to controversial to decided to no longer thinkable, that conceivably could happen to interstate war. So it's happened to things like slavery. Slavery used to be a live controversy. There were, people argued that it's pros and cons. Not only does that not happen, but it would be almost like a sick joke to say, well, maybe we should bring slavery back. Or at a smaller scale, things like smoking in classrooms and public places. Once it's done, it's kind of done, and it's no longer even a live option. It's not inconceivable that that could happen to organized war between two countries. When it comes to civil war, it's a whole other story, but at least for interstate war.